Welcome to episode 14, the Advancing Net Zero for Building Green 2022, the digital conference. Building Green is the flagship campaign for PHILGBC events and consists of year-round activities that encourage participation in the green building advocacy. I am Mario Sualto with the PHILGBC National Secretariat as your facilitator for today's episode. Thank you to the PhilGBC Board of Trustees for initiating this event. Our board chair, Mr. Edgar Sabidong, Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer of Arthalan Corporation, Vice Chair, Ms. Rowena Ramos, Principal Ecotectonica, Secretary, Ms. Elizabeth Mendoza, Managing Director, Monocrete Construction Philippines, Treasurer, Mr. Ramon Rufino, CEO of Neo Property Management. The members of the board, Ms. Catherine Ilagan, President and COO, PhilInvest Alabang, Mr. Felino Palafox Jr., Principal of Palafox Associates, Mr. Hener Liwanag, Junior Partner of GF and Partners Architects, Mr. Luis Chamon, Country Manager of Sangoban Philippines, Ms. Audrey Belpo, Managing Director of World Home Depot, Mr. Francisco Arellano, Consultant for Maynilad Water Services, and Mr. Gabriel Maria Angelo Cascante. I would also like to acknowledge the CEO of the PhilGBC, Mr. Christopher De La Cruz, the Executive Director, Ms. Maria Ana Tunggol, and the PhilGBC National Secretariat for organizing this conference. We would like to thank our members and sustaining corporate sponsors that support the programs of the PhilGBC and for making our activities possible. Our Diamond Sustaining Sponsor, NEO, our Gold Sustaining Sponsor, Wall Vision Corporation, and our silver sustaining sponsors, Arthalan Corporation, Daikin Air Conditioning Philippines, Ecotectonica, Firefly Electric and Lighting Corporation, GF and Partners Architects, Gigatech, KPI Elevators, Monocrete Construction Philippines, Sangoban Philippines, SMCC Philippines, Surface Repair Solutions, and World Home Depot. We would also like to thank the following sponsors and strategic partners for their support in making this Building Green Conference 2022 possible. Our Diamond Sustaining Sponsor and National Secretariat Sponsor, NEO. Our Gold Sustaining Sponsor, Wall Vision Corporation. Our BG2022 Gold Strategic Partners, Aboitiz Infra Capital Economic Estates, and City Homes Builder and Development. Our BG2022 Silver Strategic Partners, First Balfour, Daikin Air Conditioning Philippines, and Wall Vision Corporation. And our BG 2022 Bronze Strategic Partners, AGC Asia Pacific, Botanica Nature Residences, PhilInvest City, Datum Incorporated, FPD Asia Property Services, and Monocrete Construction Philippines. Before we continue, please be reminded of the following event guidelines. This webinar will be recorded by the PhilGBC National Secretariat for documentation purposes. We encourage your active participation during the event. You may ask your questions using the questions box in the GoToWebinar panel. Questions that you will raise will be addressed during the discussion period. Upon request, an electronic certificate of attendance will be issued by the PhilGBC National Secretariat to your registered email address, provided that you are present for more than 50% of the allotted time for each session, have completed the feedback survey, which will be sent to your registered email address after the event, and you've requested a copy of your certificate through events@philgbc.org. The Advancing Net Zero episode will provide you with updates on the ANZPH program and presentations on best practices and technologies for conservation, optimization, and the use of renewable energy in buildings. I will be presenting updates on the ANZPH program, including the changes in the Advancing Net Zero Energy version 1.1. Ms. G. Garcia, Managing Director of NEO, will be sharing with their company's net zero commitment and strategies that they've implemented to achieve their net zero energy for their portfolio. With her background on project management, she helped lead NEO in receiving recognitions for NEO's portfolio, including the first portfolio to be recognized as EDGE Zero Carbon, the first to have all buildings in their portfolio bear the 5-star certified and ANZPH Net Zero Energy certified. She also prioritizes the health and well-being of their building occupants, exemplified as she helped lead the first portfolio in Southeast Asia awarded with WELL Health Safety Rating, and with the recent PHILGBC Health and Well-being for Buildings 4-star rating for the 5 Neo project. As a woman in the male-dominated real estate industry, she advocates for women's empowerment, putting forward that women can contribute more to advancing sustainable development. We also have Mr. Alexander Ablaza, President of the Philippine Energy Efficiency Alliance, or PE2, who will be presenting energy efficiency in buildings as the first fuel of the country's net zero transition. With his 36-year professional career, he has been dedicated to growing energy efficiency and other clean energy technology deployment in 14 Asian markets through the identification, due diligence, and financial close of over $3 billion in direct investments, and also through catalytic market and policy interventions. Across Asia and the Middle East, he currently provides energy efficiency expertise in the objective of scaling up energy efficiency capital flows through innovative finance, investment structures, and policy reform. He convened and co-chairs the Asia-Pacific ESCO Industry Alliance and is one of the co-founders of the Global ESCO Network. He also founded and heads Climergy, Asia's pioneer equity vehicle for ESCO guaranteed energy efficiency upgrades in the commercial and industrial sector. We also have Mr. Mike Consenheim, Country Manager of Solar NRG Philippines, who will be presenting their renewable energy solutions to support your net zero targets. Mr. Consenheim founded Solar Energy in the Philippines with the support of Solar Energy Netherlands and local partners in the Philippines. With his expertise with Solar Energy Netherlands, he started Solar Energy in the Philippines with support from their head office for 2 years, and now, 8 years after their incorporation, has been one of the top solar rooftop companies with over 100 staff in the country. He is one of the founders of the Dutch Chamber of Commerce in the Philippines and was part of the Philippine Netherlands Business Council. After all of our presentations, we will be opening the floor for questions during the open forum. As shared earlier, you may send in your questions using the question box in the GoToWebinar panel. Ms. Audrey Belpo, member of the PhilGBC Board of Trustees, will be officially closing this episode. So to start our presentations this afternoon, let me provide you with updates on the implementation of the Advancing Net Zero Philippines Net Zero Energy Rating Tool, and since its launch last year. The Philippine Green Building Council leads this action in greening our built environment in the Philippines, and our objective is to ensure that we have a sustainable environment where everyone can live, work, and play. And the PhilGBC is an alliance of leaders with corporate members and partners in the building industry. Essentially, we rate, educate, and advocate for green building in the country, and we are focused on developing programs and tools to support green building projects, including capacity building and trainings, advocacy programs with the national and local government, and the assessment, certification, and rating of green building projects under the comprehensive set of tools for project proponents to help them in incorporating green building and net zero principles when you design, construct, and operate your projects. We are continuously improving and administering the BEB, the Green Building Rating System, providing information on available products and services that can help you achieve your green building and net zero targets through the Green Building Procurement Hub. And we've recently released the PhilGBC Health and Wellbeing for Buildings Rating Tool for the socioeconomic priorities that affect the health and well-being of our building users and employees. We believe we can achieve our goals through a holistic approach in sustainability. And since our launch of the Advancing Net Zero Philippines program, we've established our goal to advance towards decarbonizing our built environment. And we recognize that there are opportunities to push and advance our market to further reduce our negative impacts and contribute to addressing the global climate crisis. The PhilGBC established the Advancing Net Zero Philippines program to transform the way we design, construct, and operate our projects towards the net zero goal. And globally, this objective has been towards ensuring projects reduce their resource consumption and shift towards more sustainable sources to achieve project impact neutrality and provide positive benefits to the society and the environment. Under the ANZPH Net Zero Energy Rating Scheme, we want you to focus on your project's performance. The rating scheme aims to conserve energy through passive design strategies, optimize the energy use in projects through active energy efficiency and conservation strategies, and reduce the use of fossil fuel-based electricity through the use of renewable energy. The first step in managing your energy consumption is to conserve energy use. We highly recommend that you prioritize the conservation of energy using passive design strategies to reduce the operational energy demand of your buildings or homes. You should then further improve your energy performance and reduce the energy demand of your project by using active energy efficient technologies. And lastly, to address the remaining operational energy demand of your project, you may achieve net zero by using RE that meet the reduced energy demand of your project from either or a combination of on-site and off-site renewable energy sources. As part of the continuous improvement of the system, we have released the Advancing Net Zero Energy version 1.1 to reflect changes that address editorial issues and the requirements of the system. The tool now requires at least a minimum of 40% energy demand reduction from conserve and optimize strategies before the implementation of RE solutions for projects. This is to strengthen the tool's intent in prioritizing the reduction of the excessive use of energy through passive or conservation strategies and the mindful use of energy through energy efficient technologies and practices. The target is also aligned with global operational and embodied carbon reduction targets. Under version 1.1, the tool also recognizes the use of an energy model when submitting the energy base case for projects under Stage 3 operations. You may now use either an energy model of the project's code-compliant design or the 12-month actual energy consumption data for an existing project's energy base case. Lastly, to provide further clarity in the requirements, a list of energy end uses or energy-related building systems were included based on ANSI ASHRAE Standard 209. Projects may undergo the ANZPH certification process as the formal assessment, rating, and certification process for projects under the program. You may have your project certified as an advancing net zero energy project by demonstrating how you advance towards net zero, or if you achieve 100% energy performance, you may also be awarded as a net zero energy project. We are using a star system to rate how well you advance towards net zero energy for your project. If you are able to exhibit a minimum 40% energy consumption reduction through conserving and optimizing the energy demand, and use renewable energy for the remaining energy demand of your project, you may be awarded with the corresponding rating. 1 star if your energy performance is 40% to less than 52%, 2 stars if it's 52% to less than 64%, 3 stars if it's 64 to less than 76%, 4 stars if it's 76% to less than 88%, and 5 stars if it's 88% to 100%. Upon successfully completing the process, you will be awarded with an ANZPH Advancing Net Zero Energy Certificate reflecting the rating of your project. In addition, the project may also be awarded with a separate certificate as an ANZ Net Zero Energy project if you reduced your project's energy demand through conserving and optimizing energy use and using 100% renewable energy for the remaining operational energy demand of your project. Since the program's launch, we have now certified 11 projects under the program with 8 ANZPH Net Zero Energy certified projects. We conduct quarterly trainings for the program and conduct qualifying examinations for individuals to become ANZPH accredited professionals. For this quarter, join us during episode 15, The Professionals ANZPH, tomorrow, 27th of September, for the next training scheduled to become an ANZPH accredited professional. This training will be part of our month-long Building Green 2022 conference. Lastly, we invite you to use the latest version of the ANZPH Net Zero Energy Rating Scheme, register your project, and successfully complete the ANZPH certification process. You may access the latest version of ANZPH through anzph.org. One of the companies that showed leadership in advancing net zero is NEO, with all 7 buildings certified as ANZPH Net Zero Energy. May I now call on Ms. G. Garcia, Managing Director for Property Management of NEO, to present their net zero program. Ms. G.
Thank you so much, Mario. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to episode 14, the Advancing Net Zero. Next slide, Mario. The Philippine Green Building Council has defined net zero energy as the conservation and optimization of energy use in projects and the use of renewable energy for projects remaining operational energy demand. Net zero is a meaningful discussion because it is our responsibility within the industry to account for and mitigate our negative impact on the environment. We can no longer ignore the current severity of the climate crisis, and everyone in the building industry needs to take action and pursue net zero to address this. Next slide, please. So how can a project achieve net zero? Thank you, Mario, for explaining how we can be able to achieve that through PHILGBC's outline and Advancing Net Zero Philippine program. I'm here to share our project experience at NEO. Next slide, please. Starting with the building features, having the correct architectural design for your buildings dramatically contributes to the building energy efficiency and capacity for net zero. While the design is definitely not the sole factor, it is significant consideration for new constructions or looking into major renovation. Like in our case, we have a low window to wall ratio and use of high performance thermal glass balances the amount of daylight with the amount of the sun hits from entering the building. Next slide, please. One of the essential passive design concepts in the balance of daylight and heat coming into the building is maximizing the amount of daylight entering the building with the use of windows. As you can see, it decreases the need for lighting while minimizing the incoming heat from the sun to reduce cost for cooling. We achieve this through designing our buildings to have low window to wall ratio and by using high performance thermal glass. Another key feature is the podium parking design for almost all of our buildings, which also allows for natural ventilation of the area due to its above ground location. This also allows the parking area to be well lit during the daytime, minimizing the artificial lighting requirement by as much as 50% while still providing a sunshade. Next slide, please. The key objective we should keep in mind when it comes to design strategies for energy efficiency is to optimize the design, as Mario explained earlier, to reduce the heat in the building and minimize the cost for cooling while still maximizing the daylight from the sun, allowing to decrease the need for lighting. The tower orientation of our latest building, 6 and 7 NEO, were intentional as the sun path was studied to optimize the positioning of the buildings to the movement of the sun throughout the year. This harnesses natural daylight, while the aluminum shade, as you can see, we have for 6 NEO and 7 NEO provides the necessary shade to cut incoming heat by around 50%, while at the same time providing the iconic diagonal slanted architectural design for the buildings. Another innovative design strategy is the ducting of cold air, as you can see in the middle picture, for common areas of the buildings, particularly in the elevator lobbies to cool these areas. This strategy not only helps in conserving energy, but also helps improve the indoor environment quality of the building. Next slide, please. Next slide. The common misconception is that it's even more challenging for existing buildings to pursue net zero. But in truth, existing buildings have even more energy efficiency strategies, innovation opportunities. Like at NEO, we ensured that to make the switch from traditional compact fluorescent light bulbs to LED lighting for all common areas of the building. This is a notable key investment as LED lighting consumes 85% less energy, lasts up to 20 years longer than traditional bulbs, and has led to a significant investment return in only 3 to 5 years. Next slide, please. Adopting renewable energy is the crucial factor for achieving net zero. With the majority of carbon emissions coming from the building's operational energy demand, renewable energy is critical in establishing a net zero building. We at NEO partnered with Avoitis Power for Cleanergy to secure its geothermal energy source for the entire portfolio's power supply. Next slide, please. By simply implementing an energy conservation program can also add to your energy savings. As we do it, it's worthwhile to look into the areas where you can switch off unnecessary power consumption during off-peak hours to initiate your energy conservation. Next slide, please. While our efforts at NEO were intended for energy efficiency and targeted toward green building, it has been rewarding to receive third-party validation that our strategies are also contribute to net zero. Third-party certification assures tenants that the facilities are sustainable and prevents developers from greenwashing. The experience and quality of the buildings, coupled with the public online availability of the certification standards, can certainly attest to the portfolio's net zero certification status. Next slide, please. In 2021, we completed 5-star for all the 7 NEO buildings, with 3 of the buildings as pilot projects of the Philippine Green Building Council's Advancing Net Zero. This proves that the net zero is very much achievable regardless of the age of the building if your partner management commitment is strategic policies and cost-effective projects. Even with the intention for green building, you can be surprised that you also assure with regards to net zero. All 7 buildings were not new projects, but existing buildings, even one NEO being one of the oldest building in BGC. Our efforts to achieve net zero rooted in our commitments. NEO was one of the 44 signatories of World Green Building Council Net Zero Carbon Building Commitment, updating the obligation to include embodied carbon, which refers to the emissions created from new construction and major renovations. We were also among the 25 companies to commit to the ULI Greenprint Net Zero Carbon goal by 2050, which targets reducing greenhouse gas emission by half by 2030. We've made significant progress in this goal since achieving net zero carbon energy as early as 2021, years ahead of our target year. Next slide, please. You see, beyond mitigating the climate crisis, it's also vital to simultaneously address the impending impacts of climate change and how we can ensure resilience against this. Practicing accountability in real estate industry, we aim for transparency through sustainable reporting. We've signed on to support the TCFD, or the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, to comply with these reporting standards so that we can comprehensively address the climate crisis. Next slide, please. As we aim for outstanding performance at NEO, we focus to further improve the building's capacity for energy efficiency by investing in newer technologies to address the remaining pain points in our energy consumption. And one of the technology that we will be investing in is the occupancy sensors, which will be installed in less frequently occupied areas such as the common restroom and the hallways. This allows for more deliberate energy consumption and reduced unnecessary standby power by as much as 80%. On the other hand, with the smart metering and inefficiencies in the system can be more quickly detected and resolved. through a real monitoring and potentially save as much as 10%. Next slide, please. Net zero buildings offer many benefits, not only for the environment, but also for the business and health. From a business standpoint, reducing energy costs, net zero buildings pose a positive financial impact through savings, helping to increase the company's profitability. This goes for both developer and the tenant. Committing to net zero gives confidence to your investors and other stakeholders who are now expecting assets and portfolios to implement sustainable policies and initiatives. 90% of our gross floor area is leased to multinational corporations, increasingly looking for incorporate ESG principles into their objectives. Green net zero buildings are more likely to attract and retain these tenants as they are looking for landlords open to cooperating and supporting these sustainability goals. Many of the net zero building features contribute to improving living and working conditions for enhancing the health and safety of its building user. You see, net zero buildings also greatly benefit building occupants' health, well-being, and productivity. For example, indoor air quality to ensure healthy air for buildings, occupant, better monitored in net zero buildings. Having this net zero mindset and management strategies involves identifying aspects of building user health that is affected directly by entering the building. Next slide, please. The Philippine Green Building Council's Advancing Net Zero Philippines program also provides an excellent tool for transforming projects' design, construction, and operations toward net zero. Not only it is aligned with Council's Verde framework, which can be an additional rating tool to the developers can use for sustainability efforts, but it's also aligned with the World Green Building Council's global campaign to advance net zero as it aims to transform the built environment by reducing resource consumption and emissions, and by shifting towards more sustainable sources to keep projects intact at neutral or even provide positive benefits. Having your building certified under the Advancing Net Zero Philippines program will validate and assure stakeholders of your sustainability initiatives. So, as Nia always says, we invite you to certify your building for ANZ PH. Thank you, Mario.
Thank you very much, Ms. G. So we'll proceed with the next presentation. As mentioned earlier, if you have questions, please send them in to, using the question box in the GoToWebinar panel. So we'll proceed with the next presentation from Mr. Alexander Ablaza, President of the Philippine Energy Efficiency Alliance, or PE2.
Many thanks, Mario. So it's always a big pleasure for the Philippine Energy Efficiency Alliance to share its energy efficiency investment policy perspective in the context of the aspirations towards net zero targets for the country, for the region, and even for the world. So today we talk about energy efficiency in buildings and using energy efficiency in buildings as a first fuel of this net zero transition. Next slide, please. Just a quick introduction again for those who are new to PE2, Philippine Energy Efficiency Alliance. We embrace a wider range of energy efficiency market stakeholders all over the country. We have a few multinationals. We have again the different membership categories. But the point is we are trying to move the market. We're trying to partner with government. We're trying to mobilize as much technologies, deploy technologies, as well as financing and capital so that the market is indeed transformed over the long haul. Next slide. And like I said, we have 5 membership categories. The first category is for accredited ESCOs. or energy service companies. The second is for energy efficiency technology, solution service providers, and even professional companies. The third are for financial services, investors, and even equity providers. The fourth one is for nonprofits, civil society organizations, and industry associations. And the last one is growing. It's for large organizations or enterprises which have mainstream energy efficiency in their core activities. Just last week, we welcome Globe Telecom as the latest entry into this fifth membership category. Next slide. And also wearing my hat as a founding convener and co-chairman of the Asia Pacific ESCO Industry Alliance. We now have 10 country ESCO associations of China, India, Indonesia, Japan, Korea, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, Taiwan, and Thailand. Now trying to create a regional platform that will enable knowledge flow and capacity building resource exchange between more mature markets and nascent markets in the region. So we are also trying to enable a cross-border facilitation of new business as far as energy efficiency through the ESCO business model. Next slide. And lastly, the last nonprofit hat that I wear, I'm proud to say that I've had a role in co-establishing the Global ESCO Network as one of the co-founders and member of the advisory board. This is anchored in its secretariat in the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center. And there's a long-term partnership with the Efficiency Evaluation Organization, or EVO. And the broader objective is, so if APIA had 10 Global ESCO network, now has about 34 country and regional ESCO associations. And we're here to grow the ESCO market. We're here to scale up energy efficiency investments through the ESCO business model through more and more countries. We're trying to knock down barriers, help countries accelerate their market transformation, and also look for countries that will integrate ESCO interventions in their nationally determined contributions under their Paris climate obligations. Next slide. So it's all about the getting the Paris climate agreement obligations and net zero aspirations working together to get the world to keep within the 1.5 degree temperature rise. And this can only be done, and this is very well pictured by having this bucket over here, by drastically reducing the emissions, because we're hitting the brim of 1.5 degrees very, very soon. And energy efficiency is that first intervention, even ahead of renewables. Energy efficiency and conservation should be the cheapest, most immediate, largest potential opportunity to cause drastic and significant emissions reductions through the next 20, 30 years. And of course, this is balanced by introducing more and more carbon sinks across the globe. Next slide. In Davos, in the Davos meetings in January this year, when they were designing or planning the agenda for the World Economic Forum meeting, the International Energy Agency Executive Director, Dr. Fatih Birol, said that energy efficiency is the world's first fuel and the main route towards net zero. It's really now a global declaration that when we aspire a net zero future, we should deploy energy efficiency first ahead of any other intervention as the first fuel. And the same agency, IEA, estimates that in the efficient world scenario, the whole world will need to mobilize $24.5 trillion in investments from 2017 to 2040. And this is not only for new construction, this is also to retrofit all existing building energy use, existing facilities, existing infrastructure, existing transport systems. So it's all about making energy use efficient, not only in new construction, new installations, new modalities moving forward, but also just as important is to retrofitting all existing energy use, including that of the building sector. Next slide. And I like this orange wedge chart because in a study of 11 OECD member countries, and that's largely under the scope of the International Energy Agency, it showed that from the period 1974 to 2010, up to 65% of total final consumption was actually displaced by energy efficiency, clearly making it the largest, most significant source of energy, and this is where the IEA first nicknamed it the first fuel. So looking at the chart, you see energy efficiency represented by the orange wedge, which is the avoided energy equal to, and towards 2010, it was equivalent to 65% of total fuel consumption, outsizing all other sources combined, so coal, oil, gas, electricity, and others, making it the largest fuel. And it's something that more economies will have to tap and see as a resource moving forward. And this is why we keep on using now the term first fuel, ahead of renewables, ahead of decarbonizing the energy sector, ahead of all other supposed decarbonization efforts. We have to tap, we have to flow this first fuel as a stepping stone towards the 1.5 degree target. Next slide. So in my work across Asia and a little bit in the Middle East, working across 14 countries now, I preach this basic new philosophy that global energy markets should gravitate towards planning energy efficiency as a primary energy resource, and therefore an indigenous fuel to be dispatched with priority. So again, I paste this very favorite slide, a pie chart of mine from the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, showing the 2015 energy mix, showing energy efficiency as an 18% wedge, the third largest resource in the US in 2015, only smaller to the top two, natural gas and coal. And it is projected that by 2030, energy efficiency would be the largest, outsizing the shares of natural gas and coal, as the largest energy efficiency would be the largest energy resource in the United States energy mix in a decade's time. So it just shows how significant the energy efficiency is in any energy plan. And across the globe, whether it's the US energy plan, whether it's the Japanese energy plan, the European energy plan, including the Philippine energy plan, we should start to move towards that paradigm where that energy efficiency be treated as a resource and not siloed as a separate activity in the energy plan. We should not plan to build what could be shaved off in the first place. Next slide. So this is a very, very busy slide, but I think we should delve in it because it's something that's very significant as we move towards 2050. We have three sets of vertical stack bars here. The first three bars on your left side represent industry. The middle three stack bars represent the building sector. And the last three bars are for the transport sector. And let's let's just look at the middle three bars for the building sector. The timelines are 2020, 2030, and 2050. The light blue shading of or bar represents the demand for energy, or the total final energy consumption. And you see that there is a steady decline in the light blue bar. And that's the target, that by 2030 and ultimately by 2050, the biggest decline would be in the building sector. If you compare it to the industrial sector in the left and the transport sector in the right, the reductions are not that significant. It's in the buildings where the light blue energy consumption bar is will have to decrease in the most significant fashion. We have to keep in mind that across all industry, buildings, and transport sector, the global energy demand in 2050 should be around 8% lower than we have today. But what is interesting is that the 8% reduction in total energy demand will need to serve an economy that is more than twice as big and a population with 2 billion more people by 2050. And how could we, if we again go back to the middle set of bars for the building sector, and specifically for the 2050, how do we achieve, how do we bring down and reduce the net zero energy demand to the target, which is more than 8% in the case of buildings? You will see that there's a lot of demand reduction due to behavior, demand reduction due to energy efficiency, and that would be the light green, would be the most significant reduction, would be to energy efficiency, and the electrification, which is the darker blue bar, electrification of those that were formerly dependent on fossil fuels, like if there were, let's say, generation run by diesel, for example, and then looking at other means to or electrifying them rather, and making them less dependent on fossil fuels. But that goes back to the light green. The dark green could be more or less attributed to energy conservation and the passive design that G was talking about, and a bit of Mario as well. But the light green, which is more of the energy efficiency, the deployment of energy efficient technology solutions and systems, will have to harvest that energy consumption through the light green stack bar by 2050. So it's really a significant energy efficiency and conservation will be a significant strategy to drive down energy consumption in the building sector in the next 2 decades. Next slide. So you see in the building and construction share of global final and energy related carbon emissions, you will see that it's 36% as of today from the energy standpoint, and 37% from the CO2 emissions standpoint. And this combines residential buildings, non-residential buildings, buildings in the construction industry, and on other buildings related activity, which is significant. And I'm willing to bet that there's a bit of buildings also in other industry, and there's a small overlap possibly in transport, because the transport sector will have building infrastructure, and so the industrial. So, you know, if you count the small building use in industry and other transport, the energy and emissions footprint would be larger than the 36 and 37% in this pie chart today. But nonetheless, we drive home the message that it is a very, very significant portion of what we are trying to reduce and what we're trying to decarbonize in the next 2 decades. Next slide. Investments in building energy efficiency, the good news that pre-pandemic, it has increased to $152 billion in 2019. And that's a 3% increase from the previous year. Of course, energy efficiency and construction industry have indeed slowed down through the pandemic. But the point that we're trying to make is that the building efficiency, even on the pre-pandemic, remains a mere 2.7, sub 3% of the 5.8 trillion spent in the building and construction sector. So it's still a very, very small ratio that in the building sector, only $1 is spent for energy efficiency versus the $37 spent in a conventional construction approaches in the building sector. 1:37. This ratio should be increased if we are to accelerate the deployment, if we are to accelerate the carbon reduction in the building sector. Next slide. Building back better. You know, many of us have heard the acronym BBB, but we'd like to embrace a new meaning for the triple B, building back better. On a post-pandemic, we see that across 192 NDCs, or nationally determined contributions, under the Paris climate obligations of these countries, close to 200 countries, we see that energy efficiency improvements in buildings is the second most proposed in their NDCs. Renewable energy generation, which is grid tied and not in buildings. We're talking of grid tied and utility scale renewables, which is the top choice. And that's the longest green bar that you see on the right hand side of the screen. So this is not in buildings, okay? But the second longest and most opted NDC intervention is energy efficiency improvement in buildings at 63%. And we expect this 63% to increase through the 2026. We see more green building certifications adopted through countries. We see the awareness of growing more, getting more green buildings in new construction and also retrofitting of existing building stock. We expect the 63% selection of energy efficiency in the building sector to grow as an NDC contribution, as an NDC intervention rather, of the 192 plus countries participating. In fact, we see more ESCO related interventions also to improve energy efficiency in existing building stock in the years to come. Next slide. By 2030, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Marrakesh Partnership for Global Climate Action in the Human Settlements Pathway, it made this declaration that by 2030, the built environment should have its emissions, whereby 100% of new buildings must be net zero carbon in operation, with widespread energy efficiency retrofit. So you see that there would be more lenient accommodation of a slower take-up rate in existing building stock. But at least all new buildings must be net zero carbon by 2030, and that is the target that they have set. Now, it's interesting that by 2050, at the latest, it's possible that this could be advanced, all new and existing assets. So that means all new construction and all existing building stock must be net zero across the whole life cycle. So it will not make any more distinguished nor give any grace period or a more lenient treatment of existing building stock by 2050. By 2050, all energy using assets, all buildings, new and existing, will have to be net zero by that time. So we have to move towards the 2030 target first, build on that, make that achievable, work on all new construction, which is indeed possible, in the new buildings is a very good example of how new buildings should be constructed. And then work on the existing building stock, working from a percentage of compliance to a full compliance by 2050. Next slide, please. So we have to treat energy efficiency as a new, and not only as a first fuel. We should reclassify it, treat it, plan it, budget it as a net zero component, as a component of the our nationally determined contribution. Governments and especially energy ministries such as our DOE should start looking at energy efficiency in the energy plan as a primary energy resource that is dispatched with priority as a first fuel, even ahead of renewable energy. Planning agencies with the like of NEDA and local government units and even the Department of Public Works and Highways should treat energy efficiency, especially if performed in the public sector, should be treated as an infrastructure asset class. And the way that we procure, the way that we deploy, the way that we retrofit buildings, especially government buildings, should be treated as an infrastructure project. Energy efficiency should be treated as a clean energy source. You know, there's so many clean energy workshops, conferences, seminars, and they often forget that energy efficiency is a main pillar of or as a clean energy source. Every time they talk about clean energy, it's all about renewable, it's all about storage, but they forget the most significant pillar, which is energy efficiency and conservation. And lastly, it should be treated as an investment asset class, mobilizing equity and not just debt finance as we scale up. And, you know, we talked about mobilizing $24.5 trillion globally by 2040. My personal estimates in Southeast Asia, we will have to mobilize close to $900 billion in energy efficiency by 2040. And we need to mobilize that level of investments, which is typically double that required for renewable energy across the globe. Next slide. So just to put that the building sector is very significant because it will contribute to the economic and energy security and climate change mitigation impacts desired by the overall transformation of the energy efficiency market. I just want to mention the 36 trillion in end-use savings and reduced dependence on imported fossil fuels, which will continue to be a big headache for the country. We want to defer up to 45,900 megawatts of energy infrastructure. So imagine in the building sector alone, if we are harvesting a huge portion of the 45,900 megawatts, you can treat it as a resource, right? So we're harvesting waste energy from the building sector and contributing to the 45,900 megawatt deferment. And also through energy security, by accelerating the energy efficiency market transformation, we are decelerating the rise in energy prices, which makes us more resilient to price shocks due to external market conditions, such as the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Climate change mitigation, we talked about it, and all I'm saying is that the more that we need to deploy, we are able to attract climate funding through stricter building policies, building rating systems, and of course the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Act all provide the policy framework that would attract development and climate funding to this economy. Next slide. Mobilizing 12 trillion pesos in the next 2 decades. We talked about business as usual, 4 trillion, self-finance, debt finance, and lease finance, and other on-balance sheet modalities. But the larger share of 8 trillion will have to be flowing through outside the balance sheet of building owners, okay? building owners, facility owners, infrastructure, plant owners. It will have to flow outside the balance sheet of the energy end users through new off-balance sheet modalities such as ESCO performance contracts, public-private partnership transactions, joint venture agreements with government corporations, and other large-scale government retrofit programs. And we're happy to hear that GEM, the Government Energy Management Program, is accelerating this in the government building sector. Next slide. And it's all about deploying, where possible, energy efficiency technology solution services and financing. Cooling will be the most significant load and harvest potential. But of course, there will be other technologies, pumps and motors, compressed air, air handling units, refrigeration, transport related to the building sector, solar thermal cooling, for example, or solar assisted cooling will also be a significant contributor to this deployment. Next slide. As I said, there's a robust measurement and verification enabled ESCO performance contracts that would address the cooling retrofits for ESCO for existing building stocks. And this could be deployed for chilled water plant upgrades, for commercial buildings, chiller optimization for those with still efficient chillers. We have to bundle more buildings together as districts for district cooling, and in some industrial plants, even for district heating. In non-centralized cooling retrofits to introduce new technologies such as inverter and solar thermal. So we're looking at this, and I think in town planning, in townships for commercial and business districts, I think we should follow the footsteps of Malaysia in getting more buildings looped in a district cooling system for not only cheaper energy, but also a smaller carbon footprint across the bundle of buildings. Next slide. My last message is that the more we accelerate energy efficiency deployment through ESCOs, through the building sector, energy efficiency can generate 45% more jobs than infrastructure project for the same amount of stimulus or capital funding. And this we have showed and compared typical ESCO projects in the building sector versus other build program infrastructure projects in the country. Next slide. We have compared the building efficiency and efficiency in new buildings. You see that this is a screenshot from an IEA presentation, the International Energy Agency averages across several countries in the world. We should see that building efficiency creates the most jobs versus other energy sector activities. And I'd like to emphasize that it's this building energy efficiency that would create more jobs for the Philippines. Next slide. In that 9 million, if we are able to shave off 182 million tons of oil equivalent and deploy 12 trillion pesos, then we could succeed in creating at least 9 million energy efficiency jobs in the Philippines through 2040 as a post-pandemic economic recovery strategy of the country. So it creates more jobs than the normal building construction sector per $1 million. It creates more jobs than renewables per $1 million. So it's the most building energy efficiency and ESCO contracts are the most labor intensive activity in our decarbonization efforts. Next slide. So that's it. And I look forward to your thoughts, comments, suggestions, and even questions if the opportunity arises through the rest of episode 14. So back to you, Mario.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ablaza. So we'll proceed with the next presentation. Again, if you have any questions, please send them in using the question box in the GoToWebinar panel. So we'll proceed with the presentation of Mr. Mike Consenheim, Country Manager of Solar Energy Philippines.
Hello, good day, everybody. Thank you, Mario. You can hear me?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, great. So my presentation will be a little bit shorter as it's focused only on one technology, which is self-explanatory by our company name. It's Solar Energy Philippines, so we focus on solar. This presentation, I'll give you a quick background or briefing about our company and of course what this technology is about and what we could do for the Philippine industry. Next slide, please. We started in the Netherlands in 2003, so that's pretty much 20 years of experience we have since this year. We have companies not only in Netherlands, but we also started companies in Belgium, France, Spain, and also outside of Europe in Brazil, Curacao, and of course, since 2014 we have started our company in the Philippines here. So our expertise is really focused on design and engineering, procurement, importation, construction, installation, and operation and maintenance of solar systems. Mostly rooftop, but we are slowly getting into some ground mounts as well. But for this presentation, I'll be focusing on the rooftop only. Okay, so this rooftop could be for residential, commercial, and industrial. Though we don't do so many residential anymore, we're more focused on industrial at the moment, commercial and industrial. Again, just a quick brief on our company. We have by now installed in the last 8 years more than 20 megawatt of solar rooftop systems already. Some of the bigger projects that make up for these big numbers are mostly the cold storage industry, because these are heavy users of electricity, as you know, and a lot of other manufacturing facilities as well. So we go from industrial parks to industrial parks, and those where the big industrial clients are. Something about our company, we really focus on values such as service and aftercare. So we make sure that we don't only give our clients a good working technology for the first couple of years, but we make sure that the technology works for the next 15, 20 years that is supposed to work. So we therefore have an aftercare service team, and we also do O&M for all of our clients, as well as performance monitoring. Yeah, the main thing about our company is we are fully compliant with all the requirements and laws. So basically, the Philippine Electrical Code of 2019 added a so-called feature calling RSD. So this is the rapid shutdown, as well as the AFCI, which is arc fault control. These are safety measures, fire safety measures, and they were added back then. And we are one of the several companies, let's say several companies in the Philippines that are fully compliant with these, as well as the electrical codes, etc. Next slide, please. We actually won an award just this year for being the top EPC company for rooftop projects in the Philippines. Next slide, please. One of the DOE guidelines that came out recently, actually not recently, I believe a year or two ago already, basically focuses on also implementing these regulations where new and existing buildings would have to be equipped with solar or any other renewable technologies as part of the policy of adoption of the guidelines of energy conserving design. So as was mentioned earlier, this presentation is morely focused on providing the energy from renewable energy sources, in this case solar. Next slide, please. Okay, so what can your solar system do for you? Depending on the size of your roof, of course, because we need a roof space to add solar, and the size of the roof will determine the size of your solar system, which in result will determine the percentage of what we can reduce on your bill. So for example, for mostly focused on daytime usage clients, which are simply said manufacturing that only operate during the day, or schools that operate from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. That have also vast amount of roof space, we can target a higher percentage, even up to 70%. But for example, another would be an opposite sample would be a cold storage facility which operates 24/7. The sun only operates from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. but pretty much peaks between say 9 to 3, or maybe 8 to 4, something like that. That would be the peak hours of solar. Therefore, we can only target about 20 to 25% for the cold storage facilities, again, depending on how much roof space is available. The good thing about the solar, we are now looking at ROIs of as low as 3 years even. This is because in the last, say, 10 years, the price, of course, of solar have come down, but they have stabilized over the last 2-3 years. Now, what has not stabilized and still been increasing, especially in this year, is the price of electricity. So we've seen a lot of commercial clients that are actually paying extremely high rates in the province, up to even 9, 10, and 11 pesos per kilowatt hour, which results in an extremely good ROI of, like I said, as low as 3 years even. Considering this with the warranties of 10 to 25 years, even 2,500 panels, it's pretty much a no-brainer these days to just go solar as well. Load up whatever roof space you have with solar, your ROI will look very, very good. Next slide, please. So quickly on the environmental side as well, it's very obvious, renewable energy. So you are basically contributing to lowering the nationwide carbon footprint, as well as helping bring down the peak demand during the day to cooperatives, which in turn can lead to a reduction of brownouts, although I believe the demand is still increasing more rapidly than the solar industry is. So we're still trying to catch up. The good thing about solar, it's one of the most versatile and scalable technologies or renewable energy technologies at the moment, with the highest public approval rating. It's a very low barrier to get into. It's very easy. You have a roof, go to a solar company, you get a quote, and you decide if you want to invest or if you want to finance it through a bank or lease company, which I'll get into later. Next slide, please. Okay, some of the general concerns I'd like to briefly mention. Some people worry about, okay, so I have these solar panels on my roof. However, how do we do roof maintenance? So first of all, what we normally do or recommend for all of our clients is we take a look at your roof before we install it. And based on the assessment, we will be through a third-party structural engineering company, a roof contractor, basically, we'll be recommending what should be done in order for the roof to easily last another 25 years. So this could be very minor, such as a bit of scraping and a new primer, maybe painting the roof again. And sometimes it needs a little bit more work. Very rarely it needs some structural works, but most of the time it barely needs any work, depending on the quality and the state of the roof, of course. In case there would be some roof maintenance required, we can simply remove the panels. The maintenance can be done on the roof on that area, and we'll put it back. Simple. Structural integrity, again, before installing the system, there will be a structural assessment of your roof. But like I said, generally all roofs can easily carry the weight of the solar because it's relatively light. It only adds about 2.5 pounds per square foot. So considering I would be standing on 1 foot myself, that's already 190 pounds even on a square foot. So it's not that heavy. Tapping your system, this is technically easy. We just have to figure out where is your main breaker. Is it 230 volts, 3-phase? Is it 400 or 480 or whatever it is? We will design the system accordingly and make sure that it synchronizes. Stability. Well, in terms of the cleanliness of the power itself, solar is of course, in terms of let's call it demand in kilowatt, it ranges depending on the state of the sun. But in terms of more technically set the frequencies and etc., the power factor basically it's pretty much 1. So it's a clean source of electricity. For warranty, well, we keep inventory, as other companies should also do, keep some inventory for basic parts, and for bigger parts there will be a couple of days for warranty claims to be processed. Next slide, please. Okay, so if you do not want to consider a cash payment because you want to focus your funds on core business or other energy efficiency measures, then you can also look at a lease to own or power purchase agreement for the large industrial clients. These are just some of the financial options we have to make it easier or lower barrier for you to enter into solar, because it's generally a large capex upfront. Next slide, please. Okay, simply how it works, the solar panels on your rooftop, they take the light, so it's not about the heat, it's about the light. They take the light and they convert this into DC current, through which the DC current goes to a inverter, and this inverter, which is a grid-tied inverter, will convert the DC current into AC current, which means it will be synchronized with your grid. So like I said earlier, the inverter can be a single phase, it can be 3-phase, 230, 400, whatever your facility runs at, that's where we will be matching the inverter with and synchronize with your AC. The good thing about the solar, it always measures your AC frequency and voltage, and it keeps the voltage slightly higher, which makes it the preferred energy. So in other words, as we can see in the next slide, I believe, if you can show the next slide. Yeah, so if the solar, let's look at the lower graph first. If the solar is the orange, basically whatever solar electricity comes out will be consumed first. Whatever additional is required, in this case the deficit, will be automatically coming from, for example, Meralco, right? So if your demand is stable, the black line, basically you will have a mix of electricity that operates at the same time. Basically the solar first, prioritized energy, and then whatever more is required based on your demand will be coming from Meralco. So in case of the blue line, this could be a case where you're operating, for example, on a Saturday where your demand's a little bit lower, and then you will have some surplus. This surplus can only be sold if the system is below 100 kilowatt under the net metering program. Unfortunately, even after a lot of lobbying, this 100 kilowatt restriction has not been changed yet. We hope it could potentially change in the future, but for now we focus to engineer the system in such a way that we minimize the surplus, and we focus mostly on consuming all electricity for the client. Next slide, please. Some of the product partners we work with, but these are all tier 1. There's also other tier 1 product partners as well. We are not exclusive, but we do have good relationships with these suppliers. Next slide. Okay, so for the next, I believe 10-15 slides, we can go through it rather fast because they're all samples of some of the project we have done, some celebrities, some residential, some of the smaller commercial you'll be seeing in the next couple of slides. Again, like I said, anything from office spaces to manufacturing. The cold storage are the larger projects, resorts, hotels. What else? Let's see what comes by. This is Sogo, by the way, school again, and a lot of cold storage facilities. So I think we can go straight from here to the end of the presentation. And I'll wait for some questions if there are during the open forum later. Thank you, Mario.
Thank you very much, Mike. And may I invite all our speakers now to join me in the turn your cameras on and join us for the open forum for this episode. As I've mentioned earlier, you may send in your questions using the question box in the GoToWebinar panel. Please include to whom you would like to address the question to for any of our 3 speakers, and we'll gladly ask them our questions on net zero and related topics. Okay. For the first question, for Ms. G. Garcia, in your experience, what investment is the most important or has the highest impact in achieving net zero for NEO?
Thank you so much, Mario, for that question. I think there's no one size all solution for achieving net zero. So for me, especially for owners and developers, I think the most important one is really the education. It's really hard to, to get all these accomplishments without educating your staff about how they're going to go about the situational certification process. So it's really, really important to give them training, like what we did in our team. We have all our property managers are certified professionals. I myself is a certified Verde professional. Recently, we had 3 of our property managers who were certified in ANZ. So it's really, really important. We were able to receive these recommendations or these commendations based on that. So it's really important that developers, property owners should invest into the training of all our employees.
Thank you, Ms. G. For Mr. Ablaza, in your experience with ESCOs, talking about what are investments with high impact, um, for projects here in the country, what are energy efficiency strategies or net zero strategies or low carbon options has been maybe as demanded here in the country or had the best impact in terms of achieving net zero or at least advancing towards net zero in the country?
Well, I think yes, it's a very good question. I think the biggest strategy right now is to accelerate. And when you accelerate the transformation of the market through adoption of energy efficiency in existing building stock, I think worldwide, we're on track. Although it's still debatable, but we're in a much better position to achieve net zero in new buildings. But existing building stock will be the big headache of all countries, developed, emerging, or developing countries. And I think the way to do this is now to get it off, to accelerate this process, is to get it off the balance sheet of the owners of the existing buildings through innovative business models. And ESCO business models will have to be stepped up, scaled up. My company, for example, Climergy, we're not an ESCO, but we invest in ESCO project assets up to 100% of the project cost. And if we mobilize off-balance sheet capital much faster, this will partially solve the problem of this investment inertia and business decision inertia to go green, right? So many building owners are holding back because they don't have the available capital, or the ESCOs also lack access to capital to scale up. But if you do it outside their balance sheet, through equity finance from Climergy, from ESCOs, then you are able to achieve this acceleration of investments in existing building stock. So that's the strategy that we'd like to promote: accelerating energy efficiency adoption in existing building stock.
Speaking of existing buildings, I know NEO, most of the buildings were already existing when you did decide to get net zero certified. So what were challenges that you faced, especially with the older buildings in your portfolio, in incorporating net zero for your projects, Ms. G?
Basically, I think it's more of what really are the challenges. But for us, it's not the challenge, but it's something critical that we have been doing for the past how many years already. I think the most challenging part that we will be engaging into net zero is that getting the baseline data. If you wanted to go to net zero or whatever certification that you have to start with the baseline data, because you cannot just report that you achieve net zero or you achieve 100% savings into something. So you have to have that baseline data, and creating that baseline data is the most important one. So for us at NEO, for the ANZ, we never had that challenge because we have a baseline data from the beginning. Especially that we are into renewable when we started that. But I think for those, a recommendation for those who wanted to get certified is start working on the baseline data now. Because there are two ways you can hit two birds at the same time. You can use it for your Verde, and at the same time you can use it for your ANZ. And then if you wanted to go for health and well-being, you have to start with the baseline data, because those are really the challenges that you will really get when you start working on the certification.
Speaking of challenges and current limitations, Mr. Consenheim, what are common limitations that you've experienced with projects in terms of opportunity of maximizing solar PV in projects, maybe for existing and new buildings? We have similar questions that were raised by some of the participants here, issues on changing climates, weather issues, or even just in maximizing solar in their projects. And how have you overcome these challenges?
Thank you for the questions. In terms of new versus old buildings, this is not an issue. I mean, we can retrofit existing buildings as well with solar. Again, it just requires assessment of the building in person. The challenge we do have in the Philippines is that a lot of older buildings do not have plans or updated plans, and I'm specifically referring to electrical plans, roof plans. This is a challenge sometimes that we wish that was there already, because it just simply saves a lot of time. But again, it's not an issue. It can still be done, and is still being done. For new buildings, of course, it's a little bit easier because we have all the plans. We can already work with the client from the planning phase or conceptualizing even, so we can advise them some basic tips like, hey, if you can, try and face your roof in the direction of south for the northern part of the Philippines, especially Luzon. As well as advise them on the thickness of the roof sheet, what type of roof sheet they should be using in order to maximize both space and integrity. You don't want a roof sheet that's too thin, because we will be walking on the roof now and then for maintenance, and you don't want to create leaks. So those are basic things we can work on together with the client if it's from a new base project. In terms of size, it's a very flexible or very wide range of things to consider, depending on really the client's core business. If it's cold storage or if it's manufacturing during the day, if they operate 7 days a week or only 5 days a week, because otherwise we're basically wasting electricity on a Saturday and a Sunday if there's no operation, and we have to consider that. And especially for projects that are financed, that requires an investor to basically come in between, pay for it, and charge electricity, they can't charge anything on the weekend, meaning 2 out of 7 days, which is like 30+% of the electricity gets wasted. So they have to increase the rate by 30%. So these are challenges that come from a regulatory point of view, because they should be able to somehow export the electricity even above 100 kilowatt. This simply is not possible at the moment, and it's challenging, and it creates a barrier at some of our projects. Yeah, it does. It is an issue here and there. Yeah, I hope I answered most of the questions.
Yes. In terms of, we have a question here from Errol Malapitan for Mr. Ablaza. What if the target is not achieved by 2030 or by 2050? Or have you seen any directions from government in terms of incentives or even punitive measures to achieve these targets?
It's a very good question. You know, even if you compare the Renewable Energy Law of 2008 and the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Act of 2019, between the two laws, there are penalties. Well, there are incentives in both laws, but there are penalties and very heavy fines in the Energy Efficiency Act, which you don't see in the Renewable Energy Act. So if I don't change my chiller when I should, and DOE sees that I'm running a very inefficient, a responsible official of the building could face up to 5 years imprisonment, or let's say, and up to 100 million pesos in fines to the individual, right? And then, of course, there are also other administrative fines for the company, the property management or the building owner. So it's really, I think you know, the penalties in criminal liability was not there, but the late Congressman Rodel Batocabe introduced it last minute before it was approved by the House before transmitting to the Senate, because it was the same problem as the sewage treatment plants across buildings. Many building owners would prefer to pay the fine rather than put up the STP. And he said, oh, it's the same with energy efficiency. They would rather pay the fine. So what I'll do, I'll put criminal liability, and I'll put heavy fines. And that would probably, whacking the big stick. Of course, you dug a little carrot. There are a few incentives. But if I whack the big stick, I might change behavior. And so that was, I think the Energy Efficiency Conservation Act will be a very big and a very significant tool towards 2030 and 2050. But I should say this, Mario, it will not be the last policy measure. We will need still to raise the bar and improve that acceleration through successive policy measures. So that's not going to be the last law that you will see. It will be the big, most significant policy measure, but there should be follow through legislation for energy efficiency and conservation.
Speaking of legislations, we have a question here from Mr. Andres Muego for Mr. Mike Consenheim. How do you see, or what is your advice for residents to maximize solar panel, or to local government units to accelerate the adoption of RE in communities?
Thanks for the question. So in terms of for residential, how do we accelerate for residential? That was the first question, no?
Yeah.
It's the same, I guess, for the residential communities. The big challenge for most residential units that are individually owned and that individually have to make a decision is really the capex. It's really the cost up front that is an issue. A lot of people don't have this. So the second problem is there is no financier who's willing to provide a power purchase or such long-term financing for houses on an individual basis. That's also not, it's not there. It's very risky to do that. So this is still challenging. However, one of your members as well, and together we recently got a Verde accreditation, My City Homes. We have established a project together where basically for all of their houses in one village, 3,500 or 3,345 to be exact, we will be equipped with a solar system that provides enough electricity to cover the day consumption on average. We're always talking about averages because everybody, lives a different life, has different appliances. But on average, it would cover the day consumption of each household, and it gives some spare power even to cover the deficit in, say, the early morning, late night, or even at nighttime, depending on how energy conservative they are, and energy conservative and energy awareness as well. So the good thing about this, it has already been incorporated in the project. So it's basically not a choice. They can enjoy already this benefit, and it is financed basically as part of the house, right? As part of the house price, meaning as part of the house loan, which is 20 to 25 years. So considering the solar has an ROI of as low as 3 to 4 years, especially on these residential, the addition on the housing price or the loan that they have to pay compared to the savings that they can enjoy is not even close. They have so much more savings compared to what they have to pay. So basically the solar system pays itself back over time and more. So that is a way where communities and large-scale villages can actually go solar. It's by going through the developers and having them understand that this should not be optional. This should be there already from the start. So that is a big jump. So thanks to My City Homes for doing this first project with us. We hope for many more.
Mario, if I could add, I think it's more of the misconception. Others are just going to the process of investing. For me, my recommendation for everyone, whether in your commercial, industrial, or residential, conserve first. Because no matter how much renewable you have, the demand has to be lowered. Okay, if your demand as a user, your demand lowers, then that means your renewable requirement will be just the same. It will be lower, and you will have enough for the rest of the community for the use of the renewable. Imagine your investment for renewable. If your demand is high, of course, your renewable investment to purchase, solar or whatever is still gonna be high. So I think go for the conservation first, and then innovation after. If you already have that baseline requirement that you have for the demand of your electricity, your energy efficient, the way that you wanted it to be, that's the time that you invest. That's my recommendation for everyone.
Thank you, Ms. G.
Actually, I can add to that because a lot of times when some of our clients, they got a solar system and their state of mind immediately becomes, oh, I have a solar system, so whenever I wake up in the morning, everything is free. Like, it doesn't work like that. So they, at the end of the month, they're like, oh, my electricity bill did not go down.
Yes,
So
exactly.
I have to defend ourselves. Like, hey, listen, we're looking at the system performance. It was a great month. You got a lot of kilowatt hours there, but did you change anything? Did you add, did you add an air conditioning? Oh yeah, because we have solar, we added an air conditioning here, and my bedroom we started earlier, blah blah blah. We left it in the living room. So I was like, well, that's where it went. So if you want savings, you have to not change it be even more conservative with your electricity. That's when you really bring down your bill. You have the solar system to bring down your monthly expenses on electricity. So try and contribute to that by being more aware as well. Train yourself to be even more conservative. And on top of that, you have the solar system to provide for whatever you need. We've seen this a lot of times, actually.
I think this was highlighted with Mr. Ablaza's presentation, to use really energy efficiency as the first fuel for buildings. Maybe Mr. Ablaza, you can talk about this further. What is a common challenge that you see clients or end users perception or actions is a barrier in really pushing for further energy efficiency and pushing for net zero in buildings?
Well, Mike has pointed this out. I think the upfront capital will be a big barrier. Whether you're new or whether, especially existing building stock, how would you raise the capital? Some, as also G has pointed out, it's the lack of data, and so creating baseline data right now. And I'm glad if they comply with the new energy efficiency law, you are unknowingly creating that baseline right now, but you just have to go a little micro right now and put more smart metering points, dividing cooling load from lighting load from other loads, right? So in buildings. Now, there are also some structural barriers. You see buildings like residential condominiums and maybe even some office condominiums. So the usable area is titled to different properties, and they have their cooling behind the meter of that unit. And then you have that complexity of having a condominium association that is not credit worthy enough, right? To take on an investment, take debt finance or equity finance. And then all that they can do really is to do the common area. Now, we have this condominium association problem. How do you flow finance in such an arrangement? So that is going to be a challenge. Now there might be there might be some aggregation opportunities also. If the building is metered on the primary side, and then the condominium association is reselling electricity, there you have an aggregation opportunity. Now it's also aggregation. Property managers, G was talking about building 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And what if a property manager even had non-developer owned buildings in its portfolio, and they were already managing 2 million square meters of office space, for example, across different areas? So if you have that aggregation, then finance can flow through such aggregation model. So yes, there is the There's the diversification and structural issue of condominium associations and different titled owners, whether residential or office. But there's also the opportunity of aggregation that will flow finance. So at the end of the day, Mario, the biggest challenge is how will it be financed, and what contracting structure do we use? What credit-worthy entities will be at the other side of the fence to implement energy efficiency in existing building stock?
Thank you, Mr. Ablaza. Maybe just to wrap up our discussion, one of the participants here, for Mr. Andres Muego, mentioned we're experiencing typhoons, we're experiencing a storm now here in Luzon. How do you see resiliency and net zero as harmonized actions in addressing or adapting to these negative impacts of climate change? Maybe I can start with Mr. Mike Consenheim.
So our report today, 0 casualties in terms of solar panels, again. So we consider this, of course, and when building our engineering and building our systems. And I mean, there's always a freak situation that you cannot plan or prepare for. But generally, in the last 8 years that we have been installing solar in the Philippines, we've always considered this and discussed it with our suppliers. And we have had no single instance where solar panels flew off the roof. Once, but the solar panels was not done yet. It was still being constructed, so it was under construction. So that was basically a safety issue that we should have contained. But in terms of a finished project, 0. So I'm very proud to say that in terms of resilience, I think we are okay. In terms of backup power, this is something that we should be looking forward to in the next 3 to 5 years when the cost of batteries comes down. And in times of extreme weather conditions, typhoons, where there are brownouts, blackouts, it would be nice to have a commercial size battery storage that can supply the facility also during these times. So we're getting there, but it's not quite there yet. It's the technology is still improving, and the technology is still has to come down in cost, basically, because it's very, very expensive at the moment. But we're getting there, and we will get there.
Thank you, Mike. Mr. Ablaza?
Generally, 90–95% of energy efficiency interventions in a building will almost be weatherproof, right? So, in fact, we often call it a basement technology. If you're changing chillers, boilers, and kilns, it's more or less weatherproof. Where it becomes vulnerable to extreme weather conditions is, for example, for new buildings that have, let's say, passive ventilation. So you create a lot of lift, and exposure of the non-air conditioned areas are now exposed to the elements. So you have that little vulnerability there, but it's still very, very minor. We don't see any major damage to free, open, ventilated areas damaged by extreme weather events such as typhoons. So basically, the answer is there's almost no correlation, very, very little impact of extreme weather to energy efficiency interventions.
And Ms. G, since you, as examples of net zero projects, you've already reached it for new buildings, what are your efforts now, maybe on resiliency or continued efforts for sustainability?
Yeah, I think for everyone, in the project management sector, I think resiliency is very important. Equipments don't run 100%. There's always an issue of problem. So you really have to you have to go back to the working table. You have to have that idiot word in your in your offices or in your maintenance room. That's very, very important, because in that case, whatever happens, your employees or your maintenance team knows what to do, especially in extreme weather conditions. As Alex mentioned, if it's energy efficient, then the risk is like 99.9%. Effective. However, you still have that 1%, and that 1% is always the problem, in terms of development, running a building. So it's really important to address that 1%, and that's what we are addressing in NEO. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. G, and thank you once again for all of our speakers, Ms. G Garcia, Mr. Alexander Ablaza, and Mr. Mike Consenheim, for sharing your insight and your experience, and really to inspire the rest of the industry to advance towards net zero. Thank you very much. So thank you to all of our participants for joining in this discussion. If you have further questions for our speakers, please contact the PhilGBC National Secretariat at bg2022@philgbc.org so we can coordinate with them even after the event. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
So for our upcoming episodes, we have episode 15, the Professionals ANZPH, which will host the Advancing Net Zero Philippines Professionals Training course for individuals who would like to learn more about the system and be an ANZPH accredited professional. On Friday, we will also be officially closing our BG 2020 conference, 2022 conference, with episode 16, the closing at September 30, 10 a.m. So to officially close this episode, we have Ms. Audrey Belpo, member of the Board of Trustees of the PhilGBC and Managing Director of World Home Depot Corporation.
Hello, everyone. I would like to thank you all participants of Building Green 2022 episode 14, the Advancing Net Zero. Thank you to all of our speakers for this episode for sharing your expertise, experience, and insight on how our industry can advance towards our net zero goal. Ms. G. Garcia, Managing Director of NEO, Mr. Alexander, Managing Director of NEO, Ablaza, President of the Philippine Energy Efficiency, Mike Manager Barrios, and implement to take action to reduce their own carbon emissions and net zero strategies in the latest version of the ANZPH Advancing Net Zero Energy Rating Tool. Register your project, successfully complete the ANZPH certification process, and become an ANZPH Net Zero Energy Certified Project. Visit anzph.org for more information. Thank you to our Building Green 2022 sponsors and your sustained support, to our Gold Strategic Partners, NEO, Aboitiz Infra Capital Economic Estates, City Homes Builders and Developments Incorporated, to our Silver Strategic Partner, World Vision Corporation, Daikin Air Conditioning Philippines Incorporated, First Balfour Incorporated, and to our Bronze Strategic Partners, Monocrete Construction Philippines Incorporated, Botanical Nature Residences, Philinvest City, FPD Asia, AGC Asia Pacific Limited, Private Limited, and Datum Incorporated. And join us in our upcoming episodes, episode 15, The Professionals ANZPH, tomorrow, September 27, for the ANZPH Professionals Training course, and episode 16, the closing, on Friday, September 30, 2022 at 10 a.m. Visit philgbc.org for more information or contact the PhilGBC National Secretariat at bg2022@philgbc.org. Once again, thank you all for your participation on this episode 13, Advancing Net Zero.